happy that we have our distinguished speakers for SymposiumX on financial innovation. First I introduce myself. I'm Rachel Yager, CEO of Fortune Times Group, and next to me is Jaffe, from CEO of the World Wide Web Consortium, and Matan, from Matan Payment Consulting, and Krystian Czesak.
Yes.
Yay, I got it correct. All right, and Krystian from Shopify, and Koch from Google, and Ian Jacobs, right, the W3C lead, technical lead on payments and commerce. And so we are very happy that we have this group of distinguished speakers with us for the first SymposiumX that we are hosting today in 2018, November 8th. And I just want to go around and perhaps share some thoughts about how we would like to share our thought leadership in this before the event starts, and we have this time that we can perhaps have this intimate discussion, like what we think about innovation in payments and commerce on the web. So first I just want to go around and perhaps talk about our role in our companies, what we are doing. So Jeff, do you like to start?
Sure.
Yeah, and the camera is
My
there.
pleasure. My pleasure. So, as CEO of W3C, W3C, just to introduce the organization, is the organization that sets standards for the World Wide Web. It used to be that the World Wide Web meant this giant database that people would get information from, but instead the web has become the core infrastructure of society for commerce, for entertainment, for education, and basically everything else. That's broadened our agenda considerably, because we're not just trying to figure out how to tag documents, but we're trying to figure out how to have technological infrastructure support basically every industry around. With e-commerce growing like gangbusters, there's just enormous opportunity to innovate, and importantly to standardize in financial services. And so several years ago we started a major initiative in financial services. I could probably talk about that for an hour, so maybe I should just pause at this point in time and say that my role, which I guess was your question as CEO, is basically to simultaneously do everything and nothing. Meaning that we have a team of experts in each area. I am the expert in payments, so in that sense I do nothing because it's always the experts that are doing things. But then I have to make sure that we're focusing on the right topic. So
Okay.
That's kind of what I do.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. Mike, would you like to share what you're doing?
Sure. So my background, Rachel, I've spent probably the last 10 years developing new payment products during my time at American Express. So everything from EMV, contactless, mobile payments, tokenization, etc., etc. And I've also worked with banks on a global basis in multiple markets around the world to actually make use of those payment products, as well as merchants and inquirers. So that's given me an understanding not just of the technology associated with those new payment products, but also the real practicalities of actually making them useful and add value to organizations around the world. The second thing I've been very focused on is standards bodies. If we are going to maximize the use of new technologies, we do need global standards. So as a past chairman of both InVico, PCI, involved with W3C and other organizations, I've been very keen to promote the use of standards and the collaboration around the development of standards with new technology. So what we're focused on at the moment in my own company is working with small, medium-sized companies to figure out how we can make the best use of technology which is coming down the road, because I do think it's going to be a big change over the next few years in the payments industry.
Great. Yeah. Impressive. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Krystian. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm a payments technical lead at Shopify in our Montreal-based office. And we have multiple payments teams in Shopify, but mine is mostly geared towards anything that is payment processing related. To kind of quickly introduce Shopify, we're a company that enables small to medium merchants to be able to have a online presence or even a retail presence for their commerce business through multiple channels. We have around like 600,000 merchants in I think around 175 countries. And I've been at Shopify for now 4 years. I've been on the payments team for 2. And previously, before payments, I was on the checkout team, which is mostly geared towards anything that is buyer experience. So it's interesting because at the beginning, I was mostly geared towards buyers and merchants, and now my day-to-day is mostly geared toward either standards or PSPs. So I have this kind of broad palette to my advantage, I guess.
So do you crash drones in your
Yeah, so
Shopify?
yeah, I put that in my summary. Yes, I do often crash drones. I do have this creative side to me because I initially started studying cinematography and special effects in 3D. So I try and keep that creative side, which includes crashing drones.
Okay. Well, we need some excitement here, so next time you do it here.
Yeah, I should have brought. Well, it's technically illegal to in certain areas to
I know.
play. I might have or might not have.
Okay.
We can edit this video.
Good night.
We're gonna edit it. Don't worry. Zach.
Yeah, so I am one of our product leads on Chrome. I joined Chrome around 4 years ago to basically try and take on like the payments problem. So I think relative to certainly like Mike and probably even Krystian, I know the least about payments on the whole. I don't actually view myself primarily as a payments person, even internally at the company. I come from a much more like product and user-oriented background, but it's always been like the mission of the Chrome team to like move the web forward, and that means find new capabilities to solve user problems and empower developers to give great experiences. And one of the big missing pieces that we saw was like payments isn't great. You know, payments when the web first emerged, it wasn't like this is going to be a great shopping platform. And so we sort of tacked payments on, right, and leveraged forms, and we looked at that and we were like, there's some work here to fix this. And so I got involved around 4 years ago to try and figure out what fixing that looks like, and that led me to W3C and conversations with Ian and joining and sort of eventually sort of becoming one of the editors on the payment request API, which we'll be talking about a bit today.
Well, great, yeah. And definitely when I go to my favorite coffee place, I don't want to mention the name, but I'm using, like, I have to pay by Google, you know, and
Yeah.
it's faster, right? So anyway, yeah, great, yeah. Ian, yeah.
Yes, so my name is Ian Jacobs. I guess I should look up here. I am not a payments person, so I know less than Zach, I know that for sure. And I have been at the World Wide Web Consortium for 22 or 23 years now, so I'm
Yeah.
fundamentally a web person. And I think what we learn in our staff roles at W3C is a little bit of technology, a lot of diplomacy, and sort of learning how to bring different parties to the table, many of whom are competitors, and try to get them to work together to better the web. And so it's a great pleasure to sort of meet people like Mike and Zach and Krystian from different companies and different parts of the ecosystem, and try to find ways in which they would all benefit from web standards. So I've been doing the payments thing for about 2.5 years, and before that did a lot of other things at W3C. So it's had a great opportunity today to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
It's gotta be longer than 2.5 years, by the way.
We sort of kicked off in oh yeah, no, you're
Yeah,
right.
I think
What was
it's-
it? 2015,
it's
end of
4 or
2015. So, well, and now we're coming on 3 years officially, yeah. So.
By the way, when I was calling various speakers and also people from the members company, they have been mentioning all your names. So you are well known in the W3C community, very well respected, and I just want to make sure that you get to hear that I heard your name, being referred to, and so really, again, very honored that all of you are speaking at the first SymposiumX. So I'd like to share, maybe we go around like this, rotate, and Ian, perhaps go first. What do you think are your,
So,
32 years, you have a lot of things to say.
Since all I've ever done is to do the web thing, I guess within
The web.
I guess within W3C, we have been building our community for a number of years, and before payments, one of the things that I had the pleasure of working on was a project called Community Groups, where we had learned from the developer community that some people were not participating because they found it too complex or too costly, too cumbersome in terms of legal agreements to participate, and so we designed a new way for more people to get involved, and today there are 10,000 people who are signed up for community groups, and so I think that's helped our community a lot as a way to funnel new ideas for the web more easily into the consortium. And then we have another part of the process where those things are standardized and solidified. And so that combination of incubation and standardization, I think, has really been fun to work on. So.
Yeah. And I think that this also flowed into what we are trying to achieve today with SymposiumX, is to build the community of financial innovation and to groom that thought leadership, to showcase the thought leadership and to lead the path, to allow very meaningful discussion. Thank you, Ian. Zach, what?
Greatest achievement. No, I think maybe just to restrict it a little bit, I think I'm pretty proud of where we've landed payment requests and how far we've come. I think that, naive Zach of 4 years ago starting this was like, oh yeah, you make a little web standard, you'll solve a problem. And then here we are 4 years later, or 3.5.
And it's a train wreck.
No. And then, it takes a lot to go from an empty space where no API exists and to actually create something and put it out there and then get buy-in, and that's like you talked about, with a lot of people who are kind of your competitors, and to sort of work together to shape that, and there's disagreements, and how do you push through those to actually land something, and land it inside of Chrome, which is already a really big product, and then land it across all of our platforms, which is another really big task. And then to actually see merchants leverage it out in the wild. Not that there isn't still ways to go, I think, and what needs to happen with it to be successful. But I think it takes a lot. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of skills to get there in some sense. And so I think I'm pretty proud of having some role in that, I think, at the beginning, in the middle.
Great, Zach. Krystian, yeah?
Yeah, it'll be on this same kind of theme. So I'm proud, obviously, on a lot of things at Shopify, but going beyond that, definitely the work we've been doing in web payments. So when I initially joined, I remember, again, being somewhat naive and oh, this is an easy problem to solve. And then realizing there's a lot of moving parts. And bringing that kind of buyer and merchant perspective from Shopify's point of view has been interesting to bring that to the working group and opening the eyes of some people. But then also in thinking of what the working group has brought to me of getting that perspective from, say, issuers, banks, where their mind is at, kind of security-wise and where the standard should go is very valuable. So, and it's an ongoing. It's not my greatest achievement. It's an ongoing achievement, of course. But that's been very, very interesting.
I want to jump in,
Yes.
and I'm going to then hand it to you, Mike, in a second. One of the things that I have learned in my small time with payments is those easy sounding problems of oh, you're just getting data from this side to this side was also how I viewed it. And then as soon as I started talking with people like at American Express, they said, ha ha ha, you're using the wrong words. The words are liability. These are the things so the sort of reframing of the problem around things like liability and fraud, and that was the sort of maturation process to go through instead of oh, it's just getting data from point A to point B. So Anyway, thank you, Mike and
Yes.
the
No, great
previous
points.
helper for that.
And I'll stick with standards worlds. I guess I think my proudest achievements is within the area of tokenization. Tokenization is now one of the key critical security techniques we use. Essentially, most of the wallets, most of the pays, more and more merchant websites store a token rather than the actual card number, which makes the whole digital infrastructure more secure. But a few years ago, we had all the different networks working on their own tokenization capabilities. So I led the charge to bring all of those separate tokenization activities within the scope of INVICO, the standards bodies. And what that meant was that we could develop one single common tokenization specification. We could develop it in an open fashion with input from the industry. And it also means we now want a public tokenization standard which anyone can use. So I kind of think it laid a foundation for something which is really critical for the development of digital commerce in the future. So I guess that's my proudest moment in the standards world.
Absolutely, yeah, that really is a big, security feature, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah, Jeff, you can go beyond W3C what you achieved.
No, I'll go beyond payments, but I'll stick with W3C. So I would say that my proudest moment is really opening up W3C from being an organization that had a bunch of geeks that were narrowly focused on the way that you handle HTML to a very broad community in many dimensions. And I think Ian already touched on one of the dimensions when he talked about the work that he led in creating community groups, which really took W3C from being just a standardization community to being a standardization plus innovation community. Because the community groups is where we do the pre-standardization innovation, and that brought a very big dimension. And then I think the other part of opening up W3C was the business relevance and making it relevant to companies like, we talked about American Express, so in honor of Mike, I'll repeat that again, and many others in the financial sector. And then similarly, in the entertainment sector, we have other companies in publishing and telecommunications, all across different industries. We're trying to solve business problems in addition to solving technical problems.
That's great, yeah. I'd like to ask Jeff, what do you think are the interesting trends in the industry at this moment in terms of in the web payments and commerce space? What do you think are the interesting trends?
I think in retrospect, W3C got into payments very late. I mean, we've all talked about the fact that we got into it 3 or 4 years ago. And I think part of the reason was our pseudo-academic kind of background, so we payments, we stayed away from that. But what ended up drawing us in was just the recognition that payments were so messed up. I mean, it was so complicated. Once we went to mobile, it got even more complicated. I mean, people were trying to do payments and fill out all these forms from the mobile device, which was very difficult. And then, there are huge issues, as we all know, about security on the web. And that's really been the focus that we've had to streamline payments and all these people who claim not to be the experts are actually the experts they're doing a terrific job solving that. I think once we get that under our belt, there are many other broader problems in commerce that we need to work on. Whether it's the integration of payment systems with advertising and things like that, dealing with how the unbanked can get good service on the web as well, because part of our vision is a web for all. So there's just so many problems in front of us, and that we need constant innovation in the web finance sector.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. What about you, Mike? What do you think are the interesting trends?
So I think I'll answer that from a slightly different direction, rather than talk about technology trends. I think what I've really noticed, and I think this meets an example of it, is the big trend towards collaboration to solve the tricky problems, which I think Jeff just mentioned. I remember going back a few years ago, I went to one of the early Money 2020 conferences in Vegas, and the whole theme was about how fintech was going to take over the world. And I went to Money 2020 in Amsterdam in June in Europe, and you could see the new theme was fintech is going to collaborate with everybody. And I think there's a realization that payments is super complicated, there's tricky things to solve. And if we can collaborate between new ideas, non-payment experts, and people who really understand the intricacies of payments, we can make big progress. And I think that's very encouraging. We're also seeing it in the world of standards as well. If I think back a few years, there were some standards bodies which almost seemed to be in competition with each other. But now we're seeing much more discussion about how can standards bodies work together, how they can collaborate, how standards can be complementary versus competition. And again, I think that's really positive for the future.
That's really, I think that in with all these differences and internationally, and a lot of things, that there's definitely a lot of room to explore in terms of collaboration and also evolution.
No, absolutely. And I think we can opportunities to learn from internationally as well, because I think technology is progressing at different rates in different countries around the world.
So interesting. What about you, Krystian? What do you think are interesting trends that you observed?
And that's an interesting question. I'll maybe bring it back to the more technical side. So there's the obvious kind of buzzwords of crypto or XR or and everything like that. But I've been mostly curious about how AI and machine learning will start gaining traction and even beyond the payments world. So initially, even at Shopify, we've been using it for, say, risk analysis or underwriting, some very kind of narrow problems, but we're seeing AI kind of expanding to more interesting stuff like conversational commerce and having the ability to, use your Google Home or Siri or whatever to not only interact with your everyday objects, but also buy stuff online, which was not possible before because of, computers weren't that powerful. So leveraging all of that AI and data we have and machine learning is definitely something that I'm interested in seeing in the next few years in the industry.
And with all this, like the text processing and speech processing and facial recognition, and it's definitely a very interesting and a bit, I think that to the layman, it's a bit scary.
Yeah, it brings
a lot of people are a bit scared with the notion of that.
It brings interesting security concerns of like all of that data mining that is now being done, just being explicit on what data you want to give to entities or companies, and kind of, you said it well, being very conscious of security on the web and everywhere is kind of an interesting question, because on the one hand, if you had all of that data available to you and mining that could be very interesting. Like you could enter to a store and you could have a billboard saying, oh, these are the interesting products you should be buying because of your past kind of buying habits. But then again, if you haven't explicitly given your consent to give that data, like where do you draw the line in all of that data mining? So,
and now the most influential Instagram influencer, right? The most powerful are robots. What do you think are the
There's so many different trends. Like what's going to be successful? I don't know. I think that at a broad level, maybe I'll just talk about. And I think maybe Jeff and I can speak to this too. But like the web, like is on this. I don't know, like the capabilities of the web and like what we're seeing come out is like pretty remarkable these days. You know. Like I couldn't even imagine like 5 or 10 years ago that you could like open like all of like Google Earth like in satellite view in a web browser, but you could do that these days with like new technologies and things like web authentication means now you can have like fingerprint access on the web, and so it's really just changed the landscape. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that even despite all of these trends and us trying to shake things up in web payments, the way the majority of people are buying things is still they type a credit card number into a form, and I think that's. So we're seeing in some sense like this trend towards like increasing sophistication of web applications and new capabilities, but some things remain, you know, we haven't quite cracked the nugget yet. And I think payments is one of those that we haven't quite cracked the nugget yet of on user experience side. I think the other interesting trend that's happening is that for the first time, we now have like the first generation of users who are online, who are truly, I think, mobile first and desktop maybe. Like they may never actually land on a big screen with a keyboard and stuff like that. And so for a long time, even though as users had got mobile phones, they were still on their desktops buying things. But now we have this new class of users who's actually always mobile first, and I think it's really forcing a lot of interesting conversations on user experience side. So I don't know, there's a lot happening in the payment space, but I just sort of look at like the big trend of like, okay, powerful web applications, users going online mobile first, globally mobile first, and like what does that mean for us? And I think there's a lot of interesting pieces that I don't know how they fit together yet, but a lot of interesting dynamics.
It's interesting, yeah. Thank you, Zach. Yeah. What about you? Yeah.
Everybody touched on ones that I think about a little bit as well, and it was interesting that one of our colleagues on the W3C staff a couple of months ago wrote an email saying, something, artificial intelligence, machine learning is going on, and then I thought, yeah, that's not the web. And then I think I made some comment to that effect on the mailing list, and I got back a list of activities where people are doing experiments with machine learning in the browser because the browsers have become so fast, and there's more and more technologies coming out to enable that access to GPU and WebAssembly and things like that, that it's becoming possible to use them as platforms for machine learning. And so that raises all sorts of interesting prospects, like risk analysis in the browser and maybe privacy protecting ways of doing things where things live in the browser and then can operate very quickly. And then mobile's another one, and we still haven't figured out the role of the web in physical world payments, for example. That's one where we sort of talk about it periodically. Should it be possible to pay from your browser easily to your parking meter or to a vending machine? And so these are things we sort of toy with, but they're pushing the bounds of how we perceive the web today. So anyway, the power of the browser is a great thing to be watching out for. Virtual reality in the browser is another one. So all these cool things coming up.
Thank you, Ian. We just saw Peter joining us, and we can actually edit the video. So no, Peter, would you like to join us? We're having like a roundtable, and now we have a bigger round.
tables, square table.
And Peter, yeah, and so we are just talking about the financial innovation and some of the thought leadership. So you come at the right time. So
I know a little bit about
that.
Excuse me, Rachel, 10 minutes.
Huh?
10 minutes time. It's already time check, it's 1:10.
Okay, no problem, yeah. So I'm going to finish with the 2 more questions. You can keep the camera rolling, we can edit that, right? Just about, as a thought leader in this field, what have you to say about financial innovation in USA and globally, all right? So we're going to go the other way around, all right?
Peter.
Oh, yeah, Peter, yeah, that's the reward for joining us, you know,
joining us
like,
just in
yeah.
time for financial innovation. So actually, I think whereas other countries have been highly regulated in terms of what they're doing in the financial innovation space, I think the U.S. has taken obviously a very different approach. We don't believe that there is going to be regulatory mandates within the U.S. to drive financial innovation. And we don't believe there's a need, given the fact that the U.S. is already starting to move forward on many things. Obviously, a lot of work that W3C has done has helped to move payments forward on the online commerce side. Additionally, the Clearinghouse launched in 2017 a new real-time payments platform, which is gaining traction. We're now at 9 financial institutions on that platform, and we will be propelling to about 1,500 by the end of next year. That'll enable about 65% reach within the U.S. for a real-time payment to be sent from an account to another account. Additionally, we're starting to move forward as an industry with things like open APIs. The banking industry, along with the aggregators and the fintechs, just founded a new organization called Financial Data Exchange that's going to be focused in on the care for API development to allow it for easier access for fintechs and banks to do business. Additionally, we've been doing work from a clearinghouse perspective in terms of defining some of those capabilities like model agreements, how we can actually smooth out the process for being able to do the third-party management on fintechs so that banks can actually onboard them in an easier fashion. So a lot of really good things happening that I think will spur a lot of innovation, sort of 2019 and beyond. And I think Clearinghouse definitely is at the precipice of it, which is one of the reasons why I'm in that organization.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Thank you, Peter. Mike, do you want to share what as a thought leader in this area, in the field of like payments and commerce, what do you think?
Sure, and it's interesting
Yeah.
hearing Pete's perspective. I've probably got a slightly different view. I think the US is making lots of strides, as Pete mentioned. What I do see, though, is the fact that the European Union, as an example, with PSD2,
Yes.
is mandating open banking,
Amazing.
is mandating secure authentication. You could argue whether it's been effective, but it is trying to force competition, it's trying to force change. Not always successfully, but it is trying to make it happen. And I do see in Europe there's faster, there's more companies looking at it because it's kind of fostered a greater energy around innovation. I also think the US has some structural challenges. It's just a big country. It's complicated, and if you compare, say, Singapore, which is a great place for innovation, it's a small country. It's really easy to make things happen. The government is very keen to be an innovative advanced payments place. You look at South Korea, where again there's lots of government interest in trying to make it a real innovative country. So that's India, where you've got the government trying with the unbanked population as a driver. So I think you've got other countries where it's easier to innovate quicker. And it's one reason why I think it's going to be important for the US to look at what's happening in those countries, because it's probably going to be used to get learnings from them we can bring back to the big, complicated beast which is the US. So I guess that's my, not completely disagreeing, but
That's interesting.
different perspectives.
Absolutely, yeah, interesting. Jaffe, you would like to share, what do you think of financial innovation in USA and globally?
If I could just build on what Peter and Mike said, I mean, I think if you think about, tokenization, the unbanked, let's throw in Bitcoins, we've had an unprecedented number of new ways of paying in the last several years. And that's kind of like at the atomic transactional level. And then the question in my mind is, what's the infrastructure that's going to cohesively support all of that? And that's a much harder problem because it touches everything.
Yes.
And in my mind, we're kind of like stumbling through making things work, and I think that somehow or other we need to create some new meeting places for innovation, for standardization of how we bring all of that together into a coherent infrastructure. There are a number of candidate technologies that are popular ones to think about, like the blockchain technologies, which may become important technologies in making all of that happen. But I think that the story is not yet written on how the underlying infrastructure will come together.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting with blockchain, and there's also, just when we talk about machine learning and all this, it may be very interesting in how this evolve, right? The evolution. What about you, Ian? What do you think?
Everybody said a lot already, but
Yeah.
I think that, again, coming from the web perspective, having an open architecture enables some of these innovations to happen sort of on their own. So if you can plug into the web as an open technology stack, you can invent new ways to make payments, you can experiment. The web is sort of changing every day with people bringing new things into it. And so we've had to learn to cope with some of this complexity and managing old browsers and new browsers, and the architecture helps support innovation. And by being an open platform, we can get out of the way and let people experiment. So I think that's a key to what we're doing, and in particular the payment request work. we're sort of trying to build extension points so that the browser performs this service of facilitating user experience and making a payment, but the data that goes through the pipe sort of can change over time. And if we get it right, lots of people can experiment with lots of new payment methods by plugging into the browser, and they won't have to reinvent the user experience, and it'll be lower cost for them to do so. It'll be less disruptive for merchants. So we're trying to manage some of those risks and some of those complexities just by building an open architecture. So,
It's interesting that just being the open platform can really encourage the innovation that we have seen that is happening, has been happening, and is going to be still happening for innovation. That's a great point. Zach, what would you like to share with us? Yeah?
Maybe I guess to be slightly more controversial, I think I agree. But like, I think the U.S. is being out innovated like almost in every capacity. Like if you look at like what's happening in Asia, whether it's like China and like China's a great example of go back every year and like it's like the entire culture seems to shift with payments, right?
Yes.
Like everyone from like unbanked to banked in a very short period of time. You walk around now and even street sellers have QR codes with WeChat. And we're still writing checks.
Yes, right.
And I think that, and we're typing credit card numbers into web forms. I mean, these things just aren't happening globally. And we have good excuses for it, I think. Like, we are bigger, we are more complex, we do have established systems that are harder to change. But I don't think you can escape from the fact that we are being out-innovated, and maybe that's okay. That's working as intended. Like, we have to let them go out and solve some problems, then figure out how to incorporate them. But I think the U.S. has been a little bit slow in this area as a core infrastructure bit, and how we're gonna make change. And I think we might need some forced regulation to actually jumpstart things, because we haven't done a great job at the market hasn't done a great job of forcing it yet. It sounds like it's happening, and I think that again I'm like much less well informed than Peter or Mike, but just as sort of like from the outside perspective, that's how I look at it. But we have some catching up to do, I think, for sure.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I'm 100% in line with you in terms of the fact that we are being out innovated. I think though what we have is that we can learn from what other countries' mistakes have made, and I think even in some of the things like open APIs with financial institutions, we know how not to do it now, right? So I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a broad door that's starting to open, and I think we will start to out innovate other countries in many cases as that drives. Just in the need to keep the U.S. competitive with the global marketplace.
Yep.
Krystian, you want to share?
Sure, I'll try and bridge the gap with everything that was said.
Yes.
I'll actually expand the question to US and Canada, being that I'm from Canada, so North America.
Yes.
What I believe is, so North America, the reality is we're very credit card centric, we're card scheme oriented, right? So I'm not sure that I'd say that we're not that innovative. We're just we're pushing different kind of innovation. We're probably not being as disruptive as other global payment methods. So I'm mostly interested in seeing how local payment methods, or say alternative payment schemes, whatever you want to call them. So the wallets, the kind of bank transfers, the cash on delivery kind of payment methods play out globally, and how we can bridge the gap in terms of standards of having this infrastructure support all of this. And this is where kind of the next step for payment requests, which is payment handlers. The payment handlers, handler API comes into play, where it bridges the gap between the initial step of payment request, which was very much card centric, very much credit card centric with basic card, and then expanding that to something that is more global, and hopefully getting on board with all those global payment methods and payment schemes to bridge the gap and have a unified infrastructure.
So I am very happy about that we can have this time to share our thoughts about this. I just want to say thank you to everybody. And again, SymposiumX is our first SymposiumX on financial innovation. Definitely talking about a very interesting time, web payments, commerce, especially we are near the holiday seasons. A lot of very interesting innovation taken place in all these companies, how to deal with the holiday season, and a lot of interesting points of views, how the trends in USA and globally. So I just want to say thank you to all of you, and we will now go to our SymposiumX. See you later. All right, bye.